They scraped my roasted chicken into the trash while I stood there holding the empty platter. Greer smirked. She said they had already ordered Thai. Then she glanced down at the dog and laughed. "Who is Grandma even cooking this for?" she said. "Look, even Bobby will not touch it." Tanner and Sloan howled. Bobby sniffed the gravy that had dripped onto the floor. He turned and walked away. They laughed harder at that than at anything I had ever said in that house. Merritt studied his plate. My son. He swallowed the moment whole the way he swallowed every insult before it. He did not look up. He did not speak. I had basted that bird for 3 hours. Rosemary and lemon the way Alton loved it. I had set out the good plates. I had ironed the tablecloth with the wine stains from Christmases these people no longer remembered. I had polished 2 candlesticks and folded the napkins into neat little tents. They dropped all of it into the bin, on top of coffee grounds and greasy wrappers, and they did not lower their voices when they mocked the smell. I did not shout. My throat had gone tight, but I did not shout. I carried the platter back to the sink. I ran the water hot enough to scald. I let the burn steady my hands. The steam curled up against the dark window and gave me back my own face, smaller than I remembered, paler, but not broken, not yet. I want to tell you how a woman becomes invisible in her own home. It does not happen all at once. There is no single cruel day you can point to. It happens the way water finds a crack in stone, one patient drop at a time. You do not notice the damage until the whole thing splits. My name is Nadine Anderson. I was 68 years old that August, and the house they were laughing in belonged to me. Not to Merritt, not to Greer, to me. Alton and I bought it 41 years ago with money we had saved a little at a time. He was a bookbinder. His hands smelled of glue and leather and old paper until the day he died. I used to tease him that he loved the smell of a finished spine more than he loved my cooking. He would kiss my temple and say that a good binding and a good wife both held a person together. He had a way of making a sentence feel like a gift. We paid the house off slowly. Every board and every bill came out of our own 2 lives. When Alton passed 3 years before that ruined dinner, the deed came fully into my name, free and clear, no lien, no second name beside mine. I mention that now because it matters later. It matters more than anything else in this story. But at the time, it was only paper in a drawer, and I was only a widow learning how loud a quiet house can be. The loneliness after Alton was a physical thing. It sat in the chair across from me at breakfast. It waited in the hall at night. So when Merritt came to me 6 months into that first year and said, "Mom, come, let us all be together, it will be easier," I believed him. He said the house was too big for one person. He said the family should not be scattered. He said Greer and the kids wanted me close. I did not move into their home. I want to be clear about that, because they would spend 3 years pretending it was the other way around. They moved into mine. Merritt and Greer and the 2 grandchildren carried their boxes through my front door and filled my spare rooms and called it taking care of me. At first, it felt like a mercy. The house had voices in it again. Tanner was 16 then, all elbows and appetite. Sloan was 14 and still hugged me sometimes without being asked. Greer made a show of setting fresh flowers on the table. Merritt fixed the porch light and grilled steaks and told stories about his father until we all laughed and cried a little. I thought grief had handed my family back to me. I was wrong. Grief had only made me easy to move. You should know what I did for a living because it is the whole spine of what came next. For 35 years, I was a forensic document examiner. Not an accountant, not a real estate agent, not some office title behind a glass door. I examined documents. Signatures, handwriting, altered checks, forged wills, contracts that had been quietly changed after the ink dried. I worked for the county courts and for the state crime lab. I sat in witness chairs and explained to juries how a hand betrays its owner. People think a signature is just a name. It is not. A signature is a habit built over a lifetime. The speed of the pen, the pressure, the place where the writer lifts the tip without knowing it. The little tremor that comes with age and the different tremor that comes with a forger trying to copy a tremor. I could look at 2 signatures and tell you whether the same hand made them. I was right in court more times than I can count. I spent my whole career reading what people did not know they were telling me. And these people, the ones laughing over my chicken, had decided that the old woman in the back bedroom could not read anything anymore. Let me tell you how the shrinking went. First, it was the cooking. Greer took the pot of stew right out of my hands one evening and said, "You have done enough. Nadine, relax, be our guest." Guest. In my own house. She wrinkled her nose at the onions. She glanced at Merritt for agreement, and he gave it without a breath of hesitation. Yeah, Mom, sit down, you do not need to work yourself. So I sat, and Greer heated frozen lasagna and called it dinner. The kids cheered. No one asked if I wanted a plate. Then it was the laundry. Do not worry about it, Nadine. I will take care of it. She did not take care of it. She let it pile until she had a free hour, then scolded me gently for not reminding her. Then it was my chair. I used to read in the evenings in a soft armchair by the window. One day I came back from making tea, and the chair had been shoved into the corner. Laundry baskets sat where I used to sit. Oh, sorry, Mom, Merritt said it is just temporary. The baskets never moved. My chair stayed in the corner like a piece of furniture waiting to be hauled off. Little by little, I became the thing you step around. My steps too slow, my voice too soft, my habits too old. Do not leave your knitting here. Grandma, it looks messy. Yeah, it is like we live in a retirement home. The two of them blurred together in those days into one long snicker aimed at my back. The worst part was never the words. It was Merritt, my son who once held my hand crossing every street, who called me Mama long after he was too old for it. He never defended me. When Greer sighed about my smelly soups, he chuckled. When the kids mimicked the way I cleared my throat, he only shook his head and smiled. He was not cruel. He was absent. And absence, I learned, can hollow a person out just as clean as a knife. They gave the dog more warmth than they gave me. Bobby had a bed in every room. Bobby got the good cuts off their plates. Bobby got baby talk and belly rubs while I ate a slice of bread standing at the counter. I am not ashamed to tell you that there were nights I envied a small brown dog. There were smaller humiliations too, the kind that do not leave a mark but wear a person down all the same. The grocery store had always been my territory. For 40 years I knew its aisles like old friends. Where the good apples were stacked. Where the butcher cut the meat the way Alton liked. Feeding my family had never been only about food. It was how I said without words that I was here, that I loved them, that I was of use. So when Greer handed me a list one Saturday, I did not argue. The kids had the car. Merritt was busy. Greer did not offer a ride. She only said we were out of milk and told me to get the good bread this time, not the plain white. I buttoned my sweater to the throat against the morning chill and walked the half-mile to the store. I filled the cart the way I always had. Carefully. Carrots with the green tops still on. A cut of beef with marbling that promised tenderness. My back ached by the time I reached the register, but I did not mind. Providing felt like purpose, even when no one thanked me for it anymore. When I came home, arms heavy with bags, they were all in the front room. Greer looked up from her phone. Did you get the bread? She said. I set the loaf on the counter. She picked it up, frowned, and shook her head. This is the wrong brand, Nadine. This one is too soft. The kids do not like it. Tanner snorted. Yeah, Grandma, this is like cafeteria bread. I looked at the loaf I had chosen because it reminded me of the kind Alton used to butter thick on Sunday mornings. Words gathered in my throat and dissolved there. Greer tossed it aside. I will pick up the right one later, she said. Next time, just call me if you are not sure. Next time. As though the ache in my knees and the thought I put into every item counted for nothing at all. Then there were the dinners I was not called down for. The first time I thought it was an accident. I heard the scrape of chairs and the clatter of forks, but no one came to my door. I waited. Then I went down telling myself they had simply forgotten. But when I reached the table, the truth was plain. All of them were there. Takeout cartons everywhere. Steam rising from noodles. And no place set for me. We did not think you would want this, Grandma Tanner said around a mouthful. Too spicy for you. There is soup in the refrigerator, Greer added, if you are hungry. Soup in the refrigerator. Not at the table, not with them. Merritt kept his eyes on his plate and chewed and did not say a word. So I warmed a can of soup on the stove while their laughter drifted in from the next room, and I carried the bowl upstairs, and I ate it by the window, looking out at the street. Across the road, Faye Whitcomb sat on her porch with her daughter and grandchildren, passing a bowl around, laughing in the last of the light. I watched until the sky went dark and my bowl was empty in my lap. By the third time it happened, I understood. It was not an accident. It was easier for them without me. One less plate, one less chair, one less voice. They never said it out loud. They did not need to. They forgot my birthday that year. I did not remind them. When they left for a week at the lake, they did not ask if I wanted to come. I waved from the porch and told myself it did not matter. Once I heard Greer on the phone with a friend complaining about having an old person underfoot. I did not confront her. I sat by the window and knitted a scarf no one would wear and let the words sink into me like stones. I told myself still that they meant well, that families stumble, that grief had made all of us harsher. I told myself Merritt loved me even if he could not show it. I tried once to say something. I found him in the hall one evening and I told him softly that I felt like a stranger in the family, that I ate alone while they ate together, that the kids mocked me and he never stepped in. He sighed the long, weary sigh of a man being asked to carry too much. "It is complicated, Mom," he said. "Greer is under stress. The kids are teenagers. I am caught in the middle. Maybe you should just ease back. Let us run things. Do not take it so personally. Ease back." As though I had been pushing too hard simply by existing, by cooking a stew, by wanting a chair at the table. I did not argue. I climbed the stairs and I closed my door and I sat in the dark. I had asked for nothing but to be seen, and even that had been too much. By that August, I had stopped setting my own place at the table. I had stopped joining them for dinner. I ate upstairs, or I ate standing up, or I did not eat much at all. I had become part of the house. Silent, still, easy to ignore. But I still did one thing every single day. I brought in the mail. It was the last small job that was mine. Merritt never bothered. Greer said the walk to the box hurt her back, though it never hurt it on the way to her car. So each afternoon I went down the drive, opened the little metal door, and carried the day inside. I sorted it on the counter. Bills to Merritt. Catalogs to Greer. The rare card for me from a friend who was still alive to send one. It was a nothing job. It was also the reason I found out. On the Tuesday after the ruined dinner, I brought in a thick stack. I stood at the counter and dealt it out like cards, and one envelope stopped my hand. It was heavy, cream-colored. The return address was a title company 2 towns over. I had never heard of them. That alone was not strange. What was strange was the name on the front. Mr. Merritt Anderson, homeowner. I read it twice. Homeowner. I turned it in the light. The paper was good stock. A real company, not junk. I should have set it on Merritt's pile and gone about my evening. That is what an invisible woman does. But 35 years does not leave you. My eyes had already caught the second line. It was an appointment reminder. A courtesy note. It confirmed a meeting to complete a refinance. It listed the property. The address was my address. This house. My house. A refinance means a loan. A loan against a house. And you cannot borrow against a house you do not own. I stood very still. The laughter came from the living room the same as always. Bobby's tags jingled. The television murmured. And I felt something old and cold move through me. Not fear. Fear had burned out of me years before. This was closer to recognition. The feeling I used to get in the lab when a signature looked right to everyone in the room, except me. I put the envelope back in Merritt's pile, face down, exactly as it had been. I smoothed the edge so it lay flat. If there is one thing my career taught me, it is that you never let them see you looking. But I had seen, and a question had opened in me like a door in a dark hall. If this house is mine, and I have signed nothing, then who is standing in a title office with my address in their hands, getting ready to borrow against my walls? That night I did not sleep. I sat by the window in the dark and watched the porch light flicker and die, the one Merritt had promised to fix and never had. I listened to my family settle into a home they thought was theirs, and for the first time in 3 years I was not tired. I was awake, all the way awake. The way you are awake right before you finally understand the case that has been in front of you the whole time. I did not confront anyone in the morning. That was my first real decision, and it was the right one. An invisible woman has one advantage. No one watches where she goes. So I would use the thing they had done to me. I would move unseen. I waited until the house emptied. Merritt to wherever he went in the mornings now. Greer to her errands and her phone calls. The kids to school. Then I dressed the way I used to dress for court. Gray slacks, a crisp blouse, the cardigan Alton liked on me. I pinned my hair into a bun with the same steadiness I had used at 20. I would not look like a woman anyone could dismiss. Not today. The county records office sits downtown in a low brick building I had walked into 1,000 times in my working life. The clerk behind the counter did not know me, which suited me fine. I filled out the request slip for a property record. My own address. My own name. My hand did not shake. Public records are a beautiful thing. Anyone can look. And what a person files with the county a person cannot easily unfile. I asked for the full chain of title on the property. Every deed, every transfer going back. The clerk pulled it up and printed it and slid the pages across without a second glance. I carried them to a table by the window and sat down and read. The first pages were old friends, the original purchase, Alton and Nadine Anderson joint. Then the transfer into my sole name after his death exactly as our attorney had done it exactly as I remembered signing. And then there was a page that did not belong, a general warranty deed, dated 8 months earlier. It transferred the property from Nadine Anderson, a widow, to Merritt Anderson and Greer Anderson, husband and wife. My breath went thin. I read the granting language. I read the legal description of the lot. I read the date. And then I reached the bottom of the page, and I saw my own signature sitting there in black ink. Nadine Anderson. I had never signed that document. I had never seen it before in my life. I want you to understand what happened in me in that moment, because it was not a normal thing. A normal person sees their forged name and feels shock. I felt shock too. But underneath the shock, the professional woke up. 35 years does not switch off because the victim is you. I looked at the signature the way I had looked at 10,000 signatures under a magnifier, and it was wrong. It was wrong in the specific ways that a trained eye cannot unsee. My real signature has a particular rhythm. The N of Nadine begins with a small hook, a habit from a fountain pen I used in my 20s, a pen 40 years in the ground now. This N had no hook. Someone had smoothed it away because they did not know it was there. The pen pressure was even, too even. When I sign, I bear down harder on the downstrokes and lighten on the connecting strokes. It is automatic. It is me. This signature had one steady pressure all the way through the mark of a careful hand copying a shape rather than a living hand writing a name, and there was a tremor. A small shake in the line, the kind that comes to an older hand. Whoever made this had added a tremor on purpose to make it look like an old woman's signature. But a real tremor is irregular. It comes and goes with the natural motion of writing. This tremor was even and decorative laid on top like frosting. It was a forger's idea of old age, not the real thing. There were pen lifts in the wrong places. Little breaks where the writer stopped, checked the model, and started again. My hand never stops in those places. My hand knows the way. I sat there and I understood 3 things, one after another, like stones dropping into still water. The first stone. This deed was a forgery. My house had been signed away with a signature I never made. The second stone. The forgery was good. Very good. This was not a stranger scrawling my name off a mailbox. Whoever made this had studied real samples of my writing. Many of them. Cards I had signed. Checks I had written. The little notes I left on the counter. Only someone who lived in my house close to me going through my things could have gathered that much of me. The third stone was the one that hollowed me out. It sat down in my chest, and it did not leave. Merritt's name was on the deed as the person receiving the house. My son had not merely let his family treat me like furniture. My son had taken my home, on paper, in ink. 8 months ago, while he ate the food I cooked and slept under the roof, I owned and let his wife call me a guest. I did not cry in that records office. The tears in me had dried out a long time before, but my hands went cold and stayed cold, and I had to sit for several minutes before I trusted my legs. Then the training took over because the training is the only thing that has never once let me down. I did not have a case yet. I had a suspicion and a trained eye. And I, of all people, knew that a trained eye is not enough. I had spent my career watching cases fall apart because someone jumped to the answer before they built the proof. I would not do that. Not with the most important document of my life. I made certified copies of everything. I paid the small fee at the counter and I got the county seal pressed into the corner of each page because a certified copy carries weight that a printout never will. I folded them into my bag beside my identification and the keyring they did not know I still kept. And I faced the first real wall. I could not be the expert on my own case. No court in the country would let me sit in the witness chair and testify that my own signature was forged. The conflict was too obvious. A prosecutor would laugh me out of the room, and rightly. My opinion, the opinion I had built over 35 years, was worth nothing here, precisely because the name in question was mine. I needed someone else. Someone independent. Someone whose report a judge would trust because they had no reason on this earth to favor Nadine Anderson. I knew exactly who to call. Odette Ramsey and I came up through the same lab in the same years. She retired 2 years after I did. She still took private cases, the careful kind, the kind that end up in front of judges. She was the best I ever worked beside, and the only person alive who could look at my hand and my history and tell a court the truth, without a shred of bias, because Odette Ramsey never once in her life bent a finding to please anyone. I called her from a bench outside the records office, out of the house, away from every ear. I had not spoken to her in over a year. She answered on the third ring and said my name like no time had passed at all. I told her I had a questioned document. I told her whose signature was on it. There was a long pause on the line. Then she said in that flat, steady voice I had missed, "Bring me exemplars, Nadine. Bring me everything you have got that you know is real, and do not tell a soul. Exemplars, known samples of genuine writing to compare against the questioned one. It is the ground you stand on. Without real samples, an examiner has nothing to measure the fake against." That evening I went hunting through my own bedroom for pieces of myself. Old checkbooks in a shoebox. Letters I had written to Alton during the 1 year his work took him away, letters he had saved and I had inherited back. A stack of birthday cards. My hand dated and genuine spread across decades. I laid them out on the quilt Alton's mother had sewn. My name over and over in my own true writing. And beside them the certified copy of the deed with the lie in the corner. Even in the low lamplight, the difference sang out to me. But I needed Odette to say it. I needed a report with a stranger's name at the bottom. I sat back against the headboard and I looked at Alton's photograph tucked in the frame of my mirror, his steady eyes, his half smile. "You would have known what to do," I said out loud. But this time the words did not come out as a plea. They came out as a plan. For 3 years I had whispered to that picture like a woman begging a ghost for rescue. I did not need rescue. I had spent my whole working life doing the exact thing that would save me now. My family had thrown out my chicken and mocked my soups and called me a smell in my own home. And the entire time the skill that could undo them had been sitting quietly behind my eyes, waiting for the day I decided to use it. That night I did not pray for patience. I had prayed for patience for 3 years, and it had bought me a corner and a slice of bread. That night I prayed for stamina, for a steady hand and a clear head and enough time. Because I understood now that this was not a fight about a ruined dinner. It never had been. They had not just stopped seeing me as a person. They had put it in writing, and a document, unlike a family, cannot lie its way out of what it plainly says. I had built a career on that single fact. Now I would build the rest of my life on it. Odette met me 2 days later in a diner off the interstate far from my part of town, the kind of place where nobody looks twice at 2 gray-haired women drinking coffee in a corner booth. She had aged the way we all had, but her eyes were the same, quick, unfooled. I spread the certified copy of the deed on the table between us. I laid my exemplars beside it, the checks and cards and letters, my true hand across 40 years. Then I sat on my own hands so I would not point, so I would not lead her. An examiner who leads is an examiner who lies. Odette put on her glasses. She took a small loupe from her purse, the same kind we had both carried our whole careers, and she went to work in total silence. She looked for a long time. She turned the deed at an angle to catch the light on the ink line. She measured the height of the letters against the exemplars with a little clear ruler. She traced the path of the pen in the air above the page without touching it. Finally, she set the loupe down. She looked at me over the top of her glasses. "This is not your signature," she said, "and whoever made it had a great deal of your genuine writing to study. This is a simulation, a careful one. The pressure is uniform where yours varies. The initial stroke is missing the entry hook you have used your whole life. The tremor is applied. It is regular where a true tremor is random. There are stops and starts consistent with copying. Nadine, in my professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of certainty, you did not write this name. Someone traced or drew it after long study of your hand. I had known it, but hearing it in Odette's flat, certain voice was like having a floor put under me. I had been standing on air for 2 days. "I will write it up formally," she said. "Full report, comparison charts, everything a court needs, and Nadine." She reached across and put her hand over mine. "Whoever did this loved you enough to be in your house and study you close and hated you enough to do this. That is a particular kind of person. Be careful." I told her I would. Then I drove home to the people who had done it, and I smiled and I asked if anyone wanted tea because I needed them to keep believing I was furniture for a little while longer. That night was the hardest of the whole ordeal. Harder than the ruined dinner. Harder than the records office. Because in the records office it had been a suspicion, and now it was a certainty, with a professional's name behind it, and certainty is a heavier thing to carry. I lay awake and I let myself feel it once all the way down. Not the theft of a house. Houses can be reclaimed. What I felt was the theft of a truth I had believed my whole life, that whatever else went wrong, my son was mine, and I was his. He had studied my handwriting to steal from me. He or his wife, with his blessing, had gone through my drawers and my old checkbooks and my saved cards, learning the shape of my name well enough to counterfeit it while I cooked their dinners and folded their laundry and asked for nothing. That took months. That took patience. That took a coldness aimed directly at the woman who had held him as a newborn and walked him to his first day of school. I got up in the dark and I took Alton's photograph down from the mirror and I held it in both hands. "You told me once that people only take from you what you let them take," I whispered. "You were right about most things, but you were gentle. You never met a person who would forge your name." I looked at his steady eyes for a long time, and somewhere in that long looking, the grief in me cooled and hardened into something else. Something with an edge. Not hatred. I did not have room for hatred. What I had was clarity, and clarity is far more dangerous than rage because rage burns out, and clarity does not. I had spent 3 years whispering to that picture, like a woman begging a ghost to fix her life. I put the photograph back on the mirror, and I made myself a promise instead. I would not whisper again until it was finished. I would work. And when I next spoke to Alton out loud in this house, it would be to tell him it was done. Then I lay back down, and for the first time in a long time, my mind was not spinning in circles of hurt. It was building, step by step, the way I had built 100 cases before this one. I fell asleep somewhere in the middle of the plan, and I slept better than I had in months. Now here is a thing about Texas that they did not know I knew. In this state, you may record a conversation as long as you are part of it. One party is enough, and I was a party any time I spoke to my own son at my own table. I did not need to sneak. I did not need to plant anything in a room where I was not present. I simply needed to be in my own conversations and let a small recorder in my cardigan pocket do its quiet work. It was lawful. I checked it 3 times because a woman does not survive 35 years in the courts by guessing at the rules. So I began to talk to my family again, on purpose. I asked Merritt gentle questions over coffee. How was work? How were things? He gave me short answers and looked away, and the recorder heard every pause. Over a week I learned to steer. One evening I found him alone in the garage, bent over a stack of papers at the workbench, the light buzzing above him. For a moment he looked so much like his father that my chest ached. Then I remembered the deed, and the ache turned to stone. I said I only wanted to understand. I said I felt like a stranger in the family. I let my voice go small the way they liked it. And Merritt, tired and cornered and never as clever as he believed, began to talk. I told me things he thought were safe to tell a harmless old woman. He said the last 2 years had been hard. He said the company had let him go 18 months ago, and he had not found steady work since. He said he had not told me because he did not want me worrying. He said Greer handled the money now. He said she had a plan to pull them out of the hole, that the house had value just sitting there, that it was foolish not to use it. Use it, my house, sitting there. I asked soft as I could what he meant by using the house. He caught himself then. He said it was complicated. He said I would not understand the finance side. He rubbed his face and told me to let them run things and not take it personally. I thanked him. I said good night. I went upstairs and I sat on the edge of my bed and I listened to the recording twice with my eyes closed. There it was. My son admitting he had been out of work for 18 months. Admitting his wife controlled the money. Admitting there was a plan to draw cash out of a house he had never told me he now claimed to own. He had not said the word forgery. He did not need to. The picture assembled itself around him, piece by piece, the way a case always does when you stop guessing and start listening. But I still did not know the whole shape of it. I did not know how deep it ran or who else had a hand in it. And I had learned in the records office that a document is only half the story. A deed does not sign itself. Someone must swear that the person signing is who they claim to be and stamp it and vouch for it. A notary. I went back to the certified copy. Down at the bottom, beneath the forged version of my name, was a notary block, a stamp, a commission number, and a name. Corinne Ledbetter. I did not know a Corinne Ledbetter. I had never met her. I had certainly never stood in front of her and sworn that I was Nadine Anderson and signed away my home of 41 years, which meant one of two things. Either a notary had stamped a document without the signer present, which is against the law by itself, or the whole notarization had been staged. Either way, Corinne Ledbetter was a thread, and I have never in my life met a thread I could not pull. And Texas handed me the tool. In this state, a notary is required by law to keep a record book, a register. Every notarial act entered in order with the date and the type of document and the name of the person whose signature was taken and how they were identified. It is not optional. It is the law. A proper notarization leaves a paper trail on both sides on the document and in the notary's own book. So if Corinne Ledbetter had truly lawfully taken my acknowledgement 8 months ago, there would be an entry in her book with my name in it. And if there was no entry, then the stamp on that deed was a lie pressed into paper, and I could prove it. I did not go bang on Corinne Ledbetter's door. An amateur does that. A professional builds the request so the answer cannot wriggle away later. It was time to bring in a lawyer. I chose Roland Ashby. He had handled small legal matters for Alton and me years ago, the will-a-boundary dispute with a neighbor, long gone. He was older now, careful, honest to the bone, the sort of man who reads every line before he lets you sign it. I made an appointment under my own name, and I walked into his office with my bag full of certified copies and my recorder and my whole quiet catastrophe. Roland listened without interrupting. That is rare in a lawyer, and I have always valued it. I laid it out in order the way I would lay out a case for a jury. The refinance letter, the forged deed, Odette's preliminary findings, Merritt's admissions on tape, lawful one party, all of it me in my own conversations. When I finished, Roland took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, and he said something I will carry to my grave. Nadine, he said, a forged deed conveys nothing. In the eyes of the law, it is as if it never existed. Void from the very beginning. A thief cannot pass good title. Your son and his wife do not own this house, and they never did, no matter what is on file. You have always been the owner. What we have to do is prove the forgery, clear the record, and stop that loan before it funds. Because once a lender puts real money out based on that fake deed, the untangling gets ugly and slow, even though you would still win in the end. Then he said the word that changed the temperature in the room. And Nadine, forging a deed is not a misunderstanding between family. In this state, it is a felony. A serious one. Do you understand what that means for your son? I understood. I had spent my life on the far side of that word, watching what it did to the people it landed on. I sat with it for a moment. Then I told Roland to go forward. All of it. My son had put my home in his name with a signature I never made. I had begged quietly for 3 years and gotten a corner and a slice of bread. I was done begging. Roland moved fast, and he moved right. First, the notary book. He sent a formal written demand to Corinne Ledbetter on his letterhead requesting a certified copy of her record book entry for the notarial act on that specific date involving Nadine Anderson. A lawful request. The kind a notary cannot simply ignore. If the entry existed, she had to produce it. If it did not, her silence would speak. What came back cracked the case wide open. There was no entry. None. Corinne Ledbetter had no record of ever taking an acknowledgement from Nadine Anderson. Her book, the book the law required her to keep, held nothing on that date under my name. A stamp on the deed. No entry in the book. That is not a clerical slip. That is a notarization that never lawfully happened. The seal had been used to bless a signature that was never sworn by the person it claimed to be. And when Roland's investigator did a little quiet digging into Corinne Ledbetter, another stone dropped. She and Greer knew each other. They had known each other for years. They were friends. There it was. Not a random notary who had been fooled. A friend of my son's wife lending her stamp to a forged deed. The circle was closing, and every name in it was a name that ate at my table. But Greer, it turned out, had built more than one trap, and the second one was aimed straight at my mind. Roland's investigator pulled my financial records with my full permission, and we found it. A financial power of attorney, filed and used at the bank. A document that claimed I, Nadine Anderson, had granted Greer Anderson full authority over my accounts. It bore my signature, too, and that signature was a forgery cut from the same cloth as the one on the deed. Same smoothed hook, same painted tremor, same careful copying hand. They had used that fake power of attorney to move my money. Small amounts at first, then larger. My savings drained a little at a time by a piece of paper I never signed granting powers I never gave. And I understood all at once why the power of attorney existed at all. It was not only a tool to steal my money, it was a shield, If I ever noticed. If I ever complained. If I ever stood in a room and said my house had been taken, Greer had a story ready. Poor Nadine. She is getting confused. She signed everything herself and forgot. She gave us power of attorney because she knew she could not manage anymore. Look at her age. She does not even remember. They had forged a document whose entire purpose was to make the world believe I was too far gone to know my own name. They had not just stolen my house and my money. They had built a paper case that I was senile so that my own truth would sound like the ramblings of an old woman who had lost her grip. I sat in Roland's office and I felt the full shape of it settle over me, cold and complete. And then, God help me, I almost smiled, because they had made one mistake that they were far too small to see. Of all the old women in the state of Texas, they could have chosen to paint as a confused fool who could not tell a real signature from a fake one. They had chosen the one who had spent 35 years teaching juries exactly how to tell the difference. Roland must have seen something change in my face. He asked if I was all right. I told him I was better than I had been in 3 years. Then I told him what to do next. We would not tip our hand. We would let the closing date come close. And in the last days before that loan could fund, we would file a suit to quiet title in my name, and we would record a notice of lis pendens against the property. A lis pendens is a public flag. It tells the whole world that this property is the subject of a lawsuit. No sane lender funds a cash-out refinance on a house with a lis pendens hanging over it. The moment it hit the record, that loan would die on the table. Roland drew it all up. The petition laid it out in plain, cold language. The deed was forged. The plaintiff, Nadine Anderson, was and always had been the true owner. She sought to void the forged instrument and clear her title. Attached were Odette's report, the certified proof that the notary's book held no entry, and a sworn statement from me. We filed it 4 days before the scheduled closing. The lis pendens hit the county record that same afternoon. I know the exact hour the loan died because Roland's phone rang the next morning with a very confused loan officer on the line, asking why there was suddenly a cloud on a title he had been told was clean. Merritt and Greer did not know yet. They were still moving through my house as though it was theirs, still stepping around me, still feeding the dog off their plates while I stood at the counter. But the trap had sprung, quietly, legally, in broad daylight and in the public record where they could not touch it. The invisible woman had reached out one unseen hand and stopped the whole machine cold. Greer found out on a Thursday. I know because the house changed in an instant. I was at the counter drying a cup when the front door banged and her heels came fast across the floor, and her voice cut through the whole house like a wire pulled tight. Merritt, get in here. Something is wrong with the loan. I did not turn around. I dried the cup and set it in the rack, and I listened. They shut themselves in the back room, and I heard the shapes of it through the wall. Greer's voice sharp and climbing. Merritt's low and stunned. The words lis pendens said like a curse in a language they did not speak. A lawsuit. Who filed a lawsuit? On what? I could have told them. I did not. For 3 years they had whispered about me on the far side of walls. Now they whispered about me again, and for the first time the whispers were afraid. It took them the better part of a day to work out that the lawsuit was in my name. When they did, Greer came for me. She found me in the front room in my chair, the one they had shoved into the corner which I had quietly pulled back to the window that morning. I was knitting. I had picked it up again. There is nothing that unsettles a guilty person like calm. You, she said. What did you do? What is this lawsuit? What have you signed? I set the knitting in my lap. I looked at her. I have not signed anything, Greer, I said. That is rather the point. Her face did several things at once. She did not know how much I knew. She did not know what was on a paper. And she made the choice that small, cruel people always make when they are cornered. She went on the attack, and she reached for the weapon she had built months before. Nadine, she said, and her voice turned to syrup, you are confused. You have not been well. You signed those papers yourself. You gave us power of attorney because you knew you needed help. Do you not remember? This is what the doctor warned us about. You get an idea in your head and you cannot let it go. We are trying to protect you. There it was. The trap laid 8 months ago sprung now in my own front room. She said it loudly enough for the kids to hear from the stairs. She was building the record even as she spoke, painting the picture in the air. Poor confused Nadine. Look at her. She does not even know what she signed. Merritt stood in the doorway behind her and said nothing. Of course he did not. My son, absent to the last. I let her finish. I let her lay the whole thing out. Every word she spoke I let land because every word was a nail she was driving into her own hand, and I had a recorder in my cardigan and the law of Texas on my side. Then I stood up, slowly. My knees ached. I did not hurry. I have not been to any doctor, I said. There is no diagnosis. There is no confusion. And there is no power of attorney that I ever signed. You forged it, Greer, the way you forged the deed. And I can prove both. The syrup drained out of her face. You cannot prove anything, she said. But it came out thin. I looked at her, and I looked at Merritt behind her, and I said the truest thing I have ever said in that house. I spent 35 years proving exactly this. Do you understand what I did for a living? Do you understand what I was? You built your whole plan on the idea that I was a helpless old woman who could not tell a real signature from a copied one. You could not have picked a worse mark in the entire state. And then I told them what was already done. Not to threaten, to end it. I told them a lawsuit had been filed in my name to void the forged deed and clear my title. I told them the loan was dead and would stay dead. I told them there was a formal report from an independent examiner. I told them that the notary who stamped the deed had no record of ever meeting me because the law makes notaries keep a book, and her book was empty. I told them I had already reported the forgery to the authorities because forging a deed in this state is not a family disagreement. It is a felony. I watched it land. I watched Greer understand finally that she was not talking to a confused old woman. And I watched Merritt understand that his mother was the one person on earth who could not be fooled by the one crime he had let his wife commit. But Greer was not finished. She had one card left, and she played it, and it was the ugliest one. Even if any of that is true, she said, you cannot prove your own mind. It is your word against a power of attorney with your name on it. A jury looks at a woman your age, and they see exactly what I described. You will spend what is left of your life in a courtroom trying to convince strangers you are not senile. Is that what you want? And here, dear listener, is where they lost. Because Greer had just described out loud the exact hole in her own plan. To sell the story that I was confused, she needed my handwriting to look like the handwriting of a failing mind. And she had no idea what was waiting for her upstairs. I told her I would be right back. I climbed the stairs slowly while they stood in the front room, not knowing whether to follow. I went to the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, and I lifted out the books. Alton was a bookbinder. I have told you that. What I have not told you is the thing he did with every single volume he ever bound for me across 41 years of marriage. At the back of a finely bound book, there is a page called the colophon. It is where the binder records the making of the book, the date, the materials, a small note. Alton bound me a book nearly every year. Poetry I loved, a journal, a collection of recipes in my own writing. And in the colophon of every one, he had me sign and date the page in ink in my own hand so that the book would carry both of us in it. He said a book should hold the maker and the keeper together. It was a small romantic habit. He never once imagined it would matter beyond our love. But do you see what it is in the eyes of the law? It is a dated series of my genuine signatures stretching back 4 decades, one nearly every year, each one anchored to a moment in time by Alton's own record of when the book was made. It is the finest set of exemplars an examiner could ever dream of, not a loose stack of undated checks. A dated timeline of my true hand year by year, showing exactly how my signature aged naturally, gradually, consistently, all the way to the present. You want to argue that my mind has failed and my writing has come apart. Here are 40 years of my writing dated, proving that my hand is as steady and as consistent as it ever was, and that the signature on your deed matches none of it. I carried them down in a stack that reached my chin. I set them on the table between us one after another, and I opened each to the colophon, and I laid my true signatures out in a long-dated row that told the whole story of my steady hand across a lifetime. Greer looked at them and said nothing. There was nothing to say. And then I found the last thing tucked inside the newest book, the one Alton bound the winter before he died. A letter, in his hand. I had read it 100 times in 3 years of grief, but I read it again now out loud in a voice that did not shake. He had written, "My Nadine, keep our papers close and keep your eyes sharp. The world is full of people who will sign your name if you let them, and only one woman alive can catch them at it. That woman is you. Do not let anyone not ever tell you that you cannot see what is plainly in front of you. Your eyes are the truest thing I have ever known." He wrote that as a love note. He did not know he was writing my defense. I folded the letter. The room was very quiet. Even the dog was still. You threw my dinner in the trash, I said. You called me a smell in my own home. You decided I could not read a room. And the whole time my husband knew what my eyes were worth even after you all forgot. They did not leave that night. People rarely surrender the first time the floor gives way. But something had shifted, and all of us knew it. The house was mine, and now they knew that I could prove it, and worse, that I already had. The next morning, Roland called me to his office, and I went and we planned the end game the way a careful person plans anything that matters. Roland explained where things stood, and I will give it to you as plainly as he gave it to me. The forged deed was void from the beginning. In the eyes of the law, it had never transferred a thing. I was and always had been the sole owner of the house. The quiet title suit would make a judge say so on the record, and once a judge said it, the county would clear the false deed away as though it had never been filed. That part was not really in doubt. A forged deed cannot survive proof that it is forged, and I had more proof than most cases ever see. An independent examiner's report. A notary's empty book. 40 years of dated exemplars. My son's own admissions lawfully recorded. The forgery itself was a criminal matter, and that was no longer only in my hands. I had reported it. The authorities would decide whether to pursue it. Forging a deed and a power of attorney, using a notary seal on a document never sworn, draining an elderly woman's accounts, with a fake authorization that was not a gray area. That was a felony laid on top of a felony. And then there was the matter of getting them out of my house. This is where the story I might have told 3 years ago in my anger would have gone wrong. I might have imagined marching into the living room waving a paper and watching them flee by morning. But the law does not work that way, and I had spent my life inside the law, and I would not pretend otherwise. They lived in my home. Under the law, they were occupants I had once allowed in and now wished gone. To make that lawful and final, there is a path, and Roland walked me down it. First, a written notice to vacate. Delivered properly in a form the law recognizes, giving them a set number of days to leave. Not a threat scrawled on the refrigerator. A legal demand. If they did not go, then the next step was a forcible detainer case filed in the local justice court. A hearing before a judge. Evidence which I had in abundance. And if the judge ruled for me, which on these facts the court would issue a writ of possession, and a constable, not me, would see them out. It would take weeks, not a single dramatic evening. Roland was honest about that, and I was glad of his honesty. Weeks. But at the end of those weeks stood a certainty that no slammed door or shouted argument could touch. The house would be mine in law, and in fact cleared of the lie and cleared of the people who told it. I told Roland to send the notice to vacate, and I told him one more thing. I did not want to destroy my grandchildren. Tanner was 19 and old enough to answer for himself, but he was still half a boy. Sloan was 17 and a child in every way that counted. Whatever their parents had done, I would not put children into the street. The notice would run to Merritt and Greer. Where their parents went, the children would follow as children do. I would not chase a 17-year-old out my door with a constable. I am not what they made me out to be. I never was. Roland nodded, and I think he respected me a little more for it, and the notice went out that afternoon. The days that followed were strange and quiet and heavy. Greer stopped speaking to me entirely. She moved through the house like a storm behind glass, all fury and no sound. The kids grew wary. Tanner slammed fewer doors. Sloan once passed me in the hall and almost said something, then did not. I saw in her young face a confusion she was too proud to name. I did not push. Some understandings have to arrive on their own. And Merritt. Merritt came to me. It was late, the house dimmed the others behind their doors. He knocked on my bedroom frame the way he used to as a boy when he had done something and could not sleep for it. I told him to come in. He sat on the edge of my bed near the quilt his grandmother had sewn, and for a long moment he did not speak. Then he said, "Mom." I did not know it would go this far. I looked at him. I looked for the boy I had held crossing every street, the boy who called me Mama, the boy who cried at his father's funeral, and gripped my hand like it was the only solid thing in the world. I was still in there somewhere. But so was the man who had let his wife forge my name and had eaten my food for 8 months while my house sat in his name. "You signed a deed you knew was false," I said. "You let her tell the world I was losing my mind. You watched them throw my dinner in the trash and you laughed low so you would not have to choose. That is how far it went, Merritt. And you were there for all of it." He put his face in his hands. "I thought it was too big," he said. "The money, the debt. Greer said we would lose everything. She said the house was just sitting here. She said you would never even notice. He looked up and his eyes were wet. I told myself you would never notice. That I said was the cruelest thing of all. Not the forgery. The forgery was a crime. But telling yourself I would not notice that I did not matter enough to notice that is what you have to live with. I noticed everything, son. I always noticed everything. That was my whole life's work. You just decided I had stopped being a person who counted. He had no answer. There was none. He sat with his hands open in his lap, and for a moment I let myself grieve not for the house, but for the boy who was gone, and the man who had chosen so poorly in his place. Then I told him the truth that would have to be enough for both of us. I am not sending Sloan into the street, I said. I am not a monster, whatever your wife decided to call me. But you cannot stay here. Not after this. You will leave my house, and you will take your family, and you will begin to answer for what was done. The court will decide the criminal part. That is out of my hands and yours now. But the house is mine, and it will stay mine, and you will go. He nodded slowly. He did not argue. Somewhere under all his silence, he had known, I think, that it would end here, that a thing built on a forged name could not stand once the one person who could read that name decided to look. He stood. At the door he paused. Dad would have caught it in a day, he said quietly. Would he not? In an afternoon, I said. And so did I. It only took me longer because I did not want to believe my own son had done it. He left. The door closed softly. Not a slam. Never again a slam. They began to pack. It happened the way water recedes slowly, and then all at once. Boxes appeared in corners. Greer's coats came out of the closet they had crowded me out of. Tanner rolled his posters and rubber-banded them. Sloane's books came down off the shelves in clumsy stacks. The dog wandered the emptying rooms looking confused, and I confess I bent down once and scratched Bobby behind the ears because none of this was the dog's doing, and a creature should not be blamed for the people who feed it. I did not gloat. I want you to know that. I had earned the right to, and I did not take it. For 3 years I had sat at the edge of their meals like a ghost. Now I sat in my own front room with my knitting while they carried their lives out to their cars, and I felt no triumph. I felt only the deep, still quiet that comes after a long storm finally passes over and moves on. Greer left without a word to me. She loaded her car with her chin high and her eyes forward, a woman who would tell this story to every friend she had with herself as the wronged party, and I let her. People like Greer carry their own punishment inside them. It follows them from house to house. The kids left in a swirl of teenage silence, but Sloane at the very last stopped in the doorway with a box in her arms. She looked at me, and she said in a small voice, "I am sorry, Grandma. I did not know it was your house." I told her I knew she did not. I told her to take care of herself. I told her that one day when she was grown and out from under all of this, she would be welcome to knock on my door, and I would be glad to see her. Her eyes filled, and she hurried out before they could spill, and that was the only goodbye in the whole business that cost me anything. And Merritt, my son, carried the last box to the car. At the threshold he turned, and his mouth opened as if to find some final word. But he had spent 3 years choosing silence, and silence is a habit like any other, and in the end he lowered his eyes and carried the box out into the light, and did not look back. The door closed behind them, and the house exhaled. I stood in the middle of my own front room, and I listened to a silence I had not heard in 3 years. It was not the heavy silence of being ignored. It was a clean silence. The silence after a hymn ends when the last note is still hanging in the rafters, and the whole room is holding its breath. I walked through every room, slowly touching the walls. The banister, the worn wood of the table, Alton and I had eaten at for 41 years. Every board, every nail. Ours, mine. On the coffee table sat one of their soda cans left behind half empty and flat. I picked it up and carried it to the bin and dropped it in. The sound it made hitting the bottom was sharper than it should have been, and it made me smile because 8 months earlier they had dropped my whole dinner into a bin just like it, laughing, and now the last of them went out the same way, and there was nobody left to laugh. I opened the windows wide. The August evening came in warm and dry, and it carried the smell of the lilacs Alton had planted by the fence 40 years ago, stubborn and fragrant and still blooming long after the man who planted them was gone. For the first time in 3 years, the house smelled like the house again. Not takeout, not grease, not indifference. Lilac and old wood and coming rain. That night I cooked, not to prove anything, not for anyone, for myself. A small roast. Potatoes, carrots. Rosemary I cut from the pot on the sill, the same rosemary I had rubbed into a chicken they threw away. I set one place at my own table. I laid out the good plates, the ones Greer had kept tucked away for a special occasion that in 3 years never came. I lit a single candle, and I sat down and ate slowly, savoring every bite in the quiet of a house that was mine in name and in law and in truth. My neighbor Faye Whitcomb came by later that week once the cars were gone, and the story had made its rounds the way stories do on a street like ours. She sat on my porch and we drank iced tea, and she said gently that she had wondered for a long time about the woman she used to see through the window, always at the sink, always alone, never at the table with the rest of them. She said she was glad to see me out on my own porch in the evening air at last. I told her I was glad too. I did not tell her all of it. Some things a woman keeps. The lawsuit ran its course over the following weeks exactly as Roland had said it would. A judge looked at Odette's report and the empty notary book and my 40 years of dated signatures and my son's own recorded words, and he did what the law required. He declared the deed void. He cleared my title. The false papers came off the record like a stain lifted from good cloth. What the criminal side would bring the authorities would decide in their own time. That was no longer my weight to carry, and I set it down. I want to tell you what I learned sitting alone at my own table, in my own quiet house, an old woman with steady hands. For 3 years I believed that silence would protect me. I thought if I asked for nothing and made no trouble, and folded myself smaller and smaller, they would let me keep at least a corner of dignity. I was wrong. Silence did not protect me. Silence only taught them how much they could take. Every slight I swallowed became permission for the next. By the time they threw my dinner in the trash, it was not the first insult. It was only the last one I would ever accept. They thought age had dulled me. They thought grief had softened me into something they could sign away and step around and paint as senile when it suited them. They looked at an old woman at a sink, and they saw a shadow, a smell, a burden with a pension. What they never once saw was the thing I had been for 35 years before they ever moved a box through my door. A woman trained better than almost anyone alive to catch exactly the lie they told. They wrote my name on a stolen house. It was the one mistake I could not fail to see. They handed the forgery to the one person on earth who reads forgeries for a living. And a document unlike a family cannot smile and sigh and explain away what it plainly is. That is the whole truth of my old profession, and it turned out to be the truth that saved my home. Respect is not given. I know that now, deep in my bones, the way I know my own signature. It is claimed. It is held. And when someone tries to take it from you with a forged pen, it is defended. They laughed as they scraped my dinner into the trash. They decided I was furniture, a shadow, a smell in my own home. And I gave them their answer. Not with shouting. Not with revenge. With ink and with law, and with the quiet dignity they could never take from me, because it was never theirs to take. The house is mine again. Not only in name, in spirit, in truth. I closed the windows against the coming rain. I turned out the light. And I lay down under the quilt Alton's mother sewed beneath the photograph of the man who told me my eyes were the truest thing he ever knew. For the first time in 3 years, I slept without fear of being forgotten. Because I had reminded them and I had reminded myself of the one thing that had been true all along. I was never invisible. They only stopped looking. And a woman who has spent her whole life learning to see does not lose that gift simply because the people at her table decided to close their eyes. I closed mine at last in peace.